welcome to our Tuesday talk for today. Today's topic, Sara Cohan will be speaking on the Armenian Genocide. And welcome to our Tuesday talk for today. I have a problem here. And welcome to topic, Sara Cohan will be speaking on the Armenian Genocide. Sorry, hold on. Okay. All right, for everyone who's watching, that live blooper will be edited out later on. But welcome. Just for everyone who's been participating in the Zoom chats for TGIT, that will be taking place tomorrow, Wednesday, instead of Thursday. Email me if you would like to and don't have the link. But as I was saying, Sara Cohan serves as the Education Director of the Genocide Education Project, where she has worked for 13 years. Her background combines research, study, curriculum development, and teaching. She's a museum teacher fellow for the U.S. Holocaust Museum and Memorial and has worked extensively with the USC Shoah Foundation. In 2001, she was named the Research Fellow for Teaching Tolerance, a project of the Southern Poverty Law Center, and later served on their advisory board in 2012. She also studied in Mexico as a recipient of the Fulbright Hays Scholarship and studied Islamic influences in Europe as a fellow for the National Endowment for the Humanities. She's a master's degree in social science education and was a high school social studies teacher in Florida. And she is the granddaughter of an Armenian genocide survivor. She's also my friend. She also used to work at the JCC. And please welcome Sara Cohan.
Well, good afternoon. It was really nice of Alex to include me in your Tuesday talks. I did. I spent a short stint doing marketing at the JCC and before going on to Shoah Foundation for a bit. And I'm really honored to be here and speaking with you all. And just in the course of my presentation on the history of the Armenian Genocide, if you all have any questions, as you probably know by this point, just pop them into chat and Alex will funnel them to me. And I'm going to put my email address in chat, and that way afterwards, if you have any questions, you can feel free to email me directly. And so I just popped that into chat. And now I am going to share my screen and start my PowerPoint. You can see all my notes I have to do. All right. So hold on one second. I think I have. There we go. All right, so the Armenian Genocide is known, for a long time it was called the first genocide of the 20th century. And then with newer information, we realized that there was actually a genocide committed by the Germans in Namibia. It's called the Herero Genocide and it predates the Armenian. But what the Armenian Genocide did do, why we call it kind of the prototype of genocide for the modern era, is because of the use of modern technology and how it paved a way for, unfortunately, for more efficient methods and uses in genocide that we saw, of course, fulfilled in the Holocaust, and then again and again between Cambodia, Indonesia, Rwanda, Bosnia, Darfur, Rwanda, and others. So we generally start a presentation with this quote. I personally, if you can't tell from my name, Sara Cohan, my father is Jewish, my mother, though, is Armenian. And so I'm the grandchild of Armenian genocide survivor on my mother's side. And on my father's side, I have a history which may be similar to some of yours. It's not as direct of a link to the Holocaust to say like Alex's, but I had great aunts and uncles who were left in Poland and Lithuania who perished in the Holocaust, whereas my grandparents were actually the first ones in their families born in the U.S. And but like all of us as Jewish Americans, the Holocaust has had a tremendous, and its history has had a tremendous on my life and my worldview, as does the Armenian Armenian Genocide. Right before Hitler invaded Poland, he was quoted as saying, "Who, after all, speaks today of the annihilation of the Armenians?" And on the small, in a kind of in a micro manner, my family still speaks today of that. And this is an image of the remaining members of my family in 1918 in Turkey. This is literally all that was left. Approximately 70 members of my family were killed in the genocide. In this picture is my great grandmother. A little boy at the bottom of the screen is my grandfather, his siblings, and 2 aunts. And which alone was amazing. They were separated during the genocide and were reunited through the efforts of American missionaries. And this image was taken right before they were sent out of Turkey again, and this time to Beirut, where my grandfather lived till the mid-50s, until moving to Memphis, Tennessee, and the rest of my family leaving during the Civil War in the 1970s. I think it's extremely important, whether we're talking about Holocaust education or Holocaust history, Armenian genocide history, that we always start with understanding who the people were before we talk about when they were victims. It gives us a better understanding of what people lose if we know what they had. The kind of beige, like darker beige area between the Mediterranean and the Caspian Sea and up to the Black Sea, that was all historic Armenia. And so what Armenia is today is a yellow spot on the screen, and it is a tiny little landlocked nation surrounded by enemies, which has caused a tremendous deal of grief and trauma for Armenians all the way up until right now, as they're finishing a war with Azerbaijan. So what was historic Armenia was quite broad, and now what remains of that great land is now just very, very tiny. But Armenians are incredibly ancient people. There was really amazing. I like to point out my favorite pieces of Armenian history, which would be the first winery so far discovered. It was in Armenia. The oldest shoe. I'm a big shoe fan. The oldest shoe in Armenia. And I also like to joke that the largest chocolate bar, Guinness Book of World Records, I think it was for 2012, largest chocolate bar was created in Armenia. So it's a great place for women. Wine, shoes, and chocolate are all extremely important. But being more serious, religion has played a tremendous part in Armenian identity. It was the first Christian kingdom that adopted, or Christian state that adopted the religion of Christianity in 301 CE. For those of you who may have been out of school for a while, that would be AD. So in the Common Era, it was the first country. And Etchmiadzin, which is pictured on the screen, is the seat of the Armenian Church. It's still in existence. This is a contemporary photograph that I took on one of my trips to visit the church. The language is incredibly unique and interesting. It was developed, the written language, the alphabet was developed in 405 CE, and it tells you a lot about the Armenian people, in that it was an extremely important part of Armenian history, the development of the alphabet. The man who developed it, his name was Mesrub Moshtats, and he's actually considered a saint. Reading books are incredibly important to Armenians. I think there's a lot of similarities culturally between Armenians and Jews, and one would be the ongoing emphasis on education and learning. It's a people with a land, but not a state. While you saw that huge spans of what was historic Armenia, that area was conquered over and over again by Persians, by Arabs, by Romans, by and then by Turks, and they were used to living under seized territory, and it was only for brief moments that they had independence after the initial kingdom was conquered. So the capital of Armenia is Yerevan, and this is quite a festive image of Yerevan. It's again. It's a modern city. It has a tremendous amount of capacity and growth. I'm sure, as you all probably feel the same way, Armenians are modern. This picture of Armenians celebrating, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Big Fat Greek Wedding, but we're not wearing braids and ethnic dress. We're contemporary parts of modern world. And so our story today really starts in the Ottoman era. And that's when the Seljuk Turks took control of Byzantium, and this began in the 14th century, and the Ottomans rose to kind of not to full power, but to becoming a tremendous presence within the Middle East, North Africa, and Eastern Europe in the 16th century. It was a multi-ethnic colony, and life in the Ottoman Empire was difficult and not difficult. There was a space for Armenians to exist in, but they had to exist in that space as second-class citizens. They paid higher taxes, they had restricted legal rights, and they had limits on properties that they could own. In the 1800s, they began a fight for equality, which is the same thing that was happening across Europe. You see in France, if you see in with the Enlightenment, and that spread, the spark that spread and changed the world. Armenians were no different. They thought this is an opportunity, that they believed they needed equal rights under the law. And they were prohibited these because of the Ottoman system. And the image you're looking at is Abdul Hamid, who was the last sultan of the Ottoman Empire. Much like some of the European monarchies, there was a problem with inbreeding. If you may remember that hemophilia is a royal disease. So is certain things like the Habsburgian chin, deformities. And in the Ottoman lineage, mental illness became a tremendous problem. And Abdul Hamid was notoriously insane and extremely violent. And his inability to rule in part led to the downfall of the Ottoman system. In that time period, there was foreshadowing of what was to come about. Again, there's a tremendous similarity in this time period of the late early 1900s with what Jews experienced in Eastern and Central Europe. There were a series of pogroms that occurred across the mainly Anatolia, which was the main heart of the Ottoman Empire today. That would be Turkey itself. And the unfortunate image you're viewing right now is a depiction from 1895, and it was a multi-year pogrom led by Abdul Hamid that took approximately 200,000 Armenian lives. These events were not unknown to the rest of the world. For example, the American Red Cross had their first international mission in Istanbul, with Clara Barton actually going to Constantinople for the mission in 1896. So after this period of bloodshed, there was a brief moment, and again, this mirrors much of European history, where there was an event in which the Paris Congress of 1902, where members of Ottoman society from all walks of life came together to try to create a constitutional government that included Ladino Jews, Armenians, Greeks, Assyrians, and progressively minded Turks. But by 1908, Turks realized that they were not interested in a multi-ethnic state. There was a backlash against the Armenians, And a part of the Turkish part of the peace conference in Paris broke away and created a more hostile movement known as the Young Turks, and led by a philosophy of Turkification, which meant that that Turkey would be best served with only Turks. By 1909, 30,000 Armenians are massacred in Adana. This is basically like a blood pledge to the Sultan and to Turks that that Turkey would stay Turkish, and that Armenians would not, Armenian progressive movements would not stand in their way. At the same time that all this is happening, from like the early 1830s all the way up into 1914, the Ottoman Empire has begun to lose lands. First with Greek independence in the 1830s, and then onward, the last big piece was losing the Balkans, and really causing the Ottoman, by losing the Balkans, the Ottomans were then in real fear of losing the empire completely. When they lost the Balkans, there were a tremendous number of refugees, Turkish refugees, coming back to the main state of Anatolia, and they needed housing, they needed jobs, they needed all sorts of resources, and these resources were thought, well, we could take these from the Armenians. So this map kind of indicates the decline of the Ottoman Empire during this time, and territories lost. So now we're going to look, I know this is a very wordy slide, but we're going to just talk for a minute about the definition of genocide, because at this point where the Ottoman Empire is crumbling, World War I is on the verge of, is starting, and Armenians are in an incredibly precarious situation. The definition wasn't created into the 1930s, but it was created by a Jewish scholar named Raphael Lemkin after studying both what happened to the Armenians and also what was happening in Europe in the 1930s regarding Jews. And it says that the definition basically says that that genocide happens when there's the intent to destroy in whole or part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. And those can come in multiple ways. It doesn't have to be just killing, but A, killing members of the group, B, causing mental or bodily harm to the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions calculated to bring about physical destruction, imposing measures intended to prevent births, and forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. So the first kind of stage of the genocide was enacting laws so that governors in the different provinces had the right to arrest Armenians on the premise that they were seditious without evidence, and deport them from Turkey. So this allowed for the legalization of the deportation of Armenians. And then the second law was the abandoned properties law, which meant once they were deported into the deserts, then the Turkish state had the right to claim all of their properties. April 24th, 1915 is the symbolic start of the genocide. On this night, Armenian leaders from around, first in Istanbul and then also from other provinces, are arrested and assassinated. My great-grandfather was arrested he was not from Constantinople or Ankara, he was from a smaller city called Talis, and he was arrested along with other leaders in his community shortly after April 24th, arrested and then executed. Government orders were released across the provinces to enact the deportation and abandoned properties laws, signaling to provincial governors that they had the right now to and were expected to force Armenians from their homes on a forced march through the desert into Syria. The perpetrators it was actually a triumvirate. It was Enver, Talat, and Jamal. Enver was the kind of interesting character for many of you who may be interested in Holocaust history. Enver was a huge fan of German military and worked closely with von Sanders, a German military officer, in executing the genocide. And there it shows some very strong. They were allies. This is World War I. They were allies, and they worked extremely closely together. And not only throughout World War I militarily, but also specifically in the case of how to eradicate Turkey of Armenians. This story is quite amazing. Some of the best photo documentation we have is from a German medic who decided that what he saw wasn't right. He photographed what he saw and hid the film and snuck it out. And it's some of the best photographic evidence we have. He risked his career in doing so. And he then, in returning to Germany in the 1930s, was disgusted with what he saw happening in Germany, and confronted Hitler and was imprisoned for confronting him. He ended up surviving a prison term and lived the rest of his life in exile in Italy. This is another image of that Wegener took, and of some of those first days in Constantinople after April 24th. Again, another image by Wegener. It's this indicates the deportations out of the town. So Armenians were lined up and forced into the desert. Here's a brief clip by a man named Samuel Kadorian who survived the genocide.
While we were coming from Harper towards Urfa, on the way, the Turkish soldiers or gendarmes, they were hitting with the butts of their rifles or shooting or with their sabers, killing the people on the way who couldn't keep up with the march. And not only that, on the shores of the Euphrates River, they piled us boys from 5 to 10 years old in a pile, and the gendarmes started with their swords poking into the pile. And this is the result of one of those pokings. I was lucky enough to be under the pile, and the saber blade, the point, just nicked me on the cheek. And then, while we were in a dungeon in Urfa, one of the little babies whose mother didn't have milk enough to feed the poor thing was crying. So in order to stop the crying, one gendarme grabbed the little baby by one of its arms, threw it up in the air, and the other gendarme caught it with his bayonet. And thousands and thousands of bodies used to be taken out from that dungeon in Urfa, because we didn't have no bread, we didn't have no facilities for anything, not even sometimes water to drink. And piles and piles of bodies were taken, thrown into the desert to the jackals or the vultures, or thrown in a pile, thrown some kerosene on it and burned it.
Sam's piece is really harrowing and shows the depth of torture and inhumanity, actions of inhumanity that occurred during the genocide. These deportations were witnessed by many. Armenians weren't given water, supplies. The intention would be that they would walk through the deserts until they died. Those who happened to be able to survive the trek through the desert were then put in concentration camps along the Syrian-Turkish border, and many then perished there. Those who were then able to survive that point were able, later after the war, to find refuge in Syria and Lebanon and Egypt, Iraq, Iran. So these are those routes that Armenians were on, from Turkey all the way down to Deir al-Zor, which is again on the Syrian-Turkish border. There were, like I said, there were witnesses to this. One of the greatest witnesses for Armenians, and of course he has his own mark in Jewish American history as well, was Henry Morgenthau. I was thinking about him yesterday with the appointment of Secretary of State, and I was looking at the Secretary of State's background and his family history. I assumed that they must have known each other. At this point in history, the only place that a Jew could serve as, in the United States, could serve as an ambassador was to the Ottoman Empire. So Morgenthau had worked tirelessly for Wilson in his election and was hoping for ambassadorial post, and was extremely disappointed when Wilson did not break any tradition and gave him the post that historically only went to Jews. But Morgenthau knew that there was a need for him there, and he served his purpose as well in documenting the Armenian genocide in scrupulous detail, and sending those documents on to Wilson, to the New York Times, and to multiple other sources throughout the United States, so that people knew what was happening. Other witnesses included missionaries, humanitarian aid workers, German soldiers, businessmen always around, and foreign government representatives. The New York Times captured the story of the Armenian genocide with extreme detail. 149 articles in 1915 alone. This is in stark contrast to the insufficient reporting on the Holocaust. It very much reflects that anti-Semitism in the 30s and 40s was so strong in the U.S. that it made the U.S. not as responsive as they should have been to the humanitarian crisis of the Jews. Whereas in the situation with the Armenians, they were Christians, and they were being targeted by Muslims. And so this was a very easy piece for the American Protestant constituency to understand and want to help, at least initially. After the war, it's a different story. Oil becomes more important than morals, and the Armenians are left without international support. So when there was still international support in 1918, as World War I is slowly coming to an end, the Armenians are able to gain a small piece of land and call for independence. My great uncle from my grandmother's side, which was in Iran, there were Armenians in Iran. He was one of the first government officials of this first provincial government. But the government did not last. This first Armenian republic did not last long. By 1920, Russia had moved in order to protect Armenians from Turks who were still fighting, but with the Russian Revolution, Russia determined to absorb Armenia into its empire, and it became eventually an SSR of the Soviet Union. There were trials, but they were ineffectual. The triumvirate and others were found guilty, but then allowed to leave Turkey without punishment. Many of them lived for quite a while in exile. Armenians created an organization just much like the Mossad, hunted down many and got justice. The Treaty of Versailles was supposed to be the treaty to help hold that Armenian nation in place. But as we know from history, it failed and was replaced by Lausanne. With the placement of Lausanne in 1923, you have the formalization of modern-day Republic of Turkey, Armenia is lost, Kurdistan is lost, and Turkey is king. So the final chapter of this, between 1918 and 1923, most Armenians in the Ottoman Empire have perished. It was approximately 1.5 million of 3 million. Survivors were forced to leave, and a 3,000-year-old civilization ceased to exist. But for the Armenians, just like for many of us, 1923 did not fully end the saga. In fact, it still goes on strong today through the denial of the genocide by Turkey. Denial is not just words on paper, it is aggressive actions. I live here in Nashville, but my organization I work for is in San Francisco. Our office was actually burned to the ground this year, along with, it was part of an Armenian community center by Azeri terrorists who were supporting Turkish cause. They're very closely aligned, much like, say, Poland or Germany, or Austria and Germany. And so I've had death threats. I've received threats for travel. I've received physical threats of physical violence, and they've all been threats until this year. And this year, then actually our office was destroyed. So this constant denial that what we're teaching and what history tells us is not true through the eyes of the perpetrator is incredibly dangerous. Continuing denial creates the probability of further genocide. Turkey's never been punished for its crime, and it continues to inflict all sorts of repercussions on Armenians that have survived. In Turkey itself, there's anti-free speech laws. There's threats against foreign governments when foreign governments choose to acknowledge the Armenian genocide, violence against survivors and descendants, and revision of history and destruction of buildings. This is a simple example of denialism where you have the veneration of one of the triumvirate members, Talat. All through Turkey, you'll find street signs, you'll find statues that applaud Talat. Harit Dink was an Armenian journalist and a dear friend of our organizations. He was assassinated in the street of Istanbul in 2007. He was made an enemy of the state. His crime was simply running an Armenian language newspaper in Turkey. So within modern day Turkey, not only are there not memorials for the Armenian genocide, they're instead actually memorials saying that Turkey is the one that experienced genocide by the Armenians. And we know about this historical revisionism, and we know how this works. In Nashville, just this summer, Nathan Bedford Forrest's bust was removed from our state capitol. This image is Nathan Bedford Forrest on a horse in downtown Memphis. It was removed in 2018. And we still have a tremendous amount of work. And for those who may not have caught the news this summer, Nathan Bedford Forrest was the founder of the Ku Klux Klan. And so, as a Jew in Nashville, I find it very difficult to believe that an organization that targeted not only African Americans, but also Jews and Catholics would be allowed to stand in our state capitol. Native Americans also know this story well with the denial of the Native American genocide. This is the museum in Washington, D.C., built by the U.S. government. But one of the stipulations in the building of the museum is they could not use the word genocide once in the building. And like I said, I actually kind of already told you that denial in my life. One is I feel like there's a strong, it's part of my obligation as being part Armenian to try to fight for justice for my ancestors and to fight for correct and fair history to be taught. And then again, also that denial has impacted my ability to travel to Turkey, to see where my family comes from. It's impacted my work this year in that my resources are all destroyed, and we've had lawsuits threatened against us. This is an ongoing process. This is kind of that moment of, I don't know, where at least you have a place to take a breath. This is the Armenian Genocide Memorial in Yerevan. It's it's an incredible place to visit, and it gives us a sense of, that our tragedy will not be forgotten. So I'm actually going to stop there and go, and I'm going to leave screen share and see if there are any questions. Hey, Alex, how do I stop screen share? Can you stop it for me? Oh, here we go. Thank you. Oopsie, did I lose you, Alex?
Sorry, I was on mute.
Okay.
It's been a long week. I see there are people out there watching, but no one has had any questions yet. So This is a last call for questions for those who are watching. But I would like to hear a little more, like you talked about the how you teach it and the denial, but can you talk about like what you do as far as your work in teaching educators? And because I don't remember personally ever learning about this in school.
You should have, Alex, because New Jersey had a mandate. So I'm very disappointed in your teachers. New Jersey was one of the first, California and New Jersey were two of the first states to have mandates to teach the Armenian Genocide, because those were where large populations were. And but there are not that many places that have the mandate. So yeah, so you should have learned something, at least a line. But again, I guess I'll forgive your teachers for that. But what I do is I work with educators from around the country, usually through either school districts, state boards of education, or through professional organizations like our social studies organization in the U.S. or a history organization in the U.S. that is the professional organizations that bring history teachers or social studies teachers together. I do presentations and workshops, and I write lesson plans and curriculum, and for teachers. So, and we mainly write on Armenian genocide, but our message is actually a little bit more global. If we'd had more time, generally my main purpose in this is that understanding the specific histories of the Armenian genocide is important, but it's just as important to understand the general dynamics of how genocide happens, so that we can help begin to work with students to train them to be able to see those warning signs, so that they ideally will eventually be able to eradicate, genocide. Though I put that in the list with, stopping world hunger and, providing housing and medicine for all. So
Yeah, I hope that happens. Maybe 2021 will be the year.
Maybe 2021 will be the year. No more genocide in 2021.
Yeah, well, I may have learned about it in school. I don't remember school, but I still don't feel like it's something that's talked about as often as the Holocaust. Is it because there's less Armenians in the U.S. than there are Jews?
That's a good question. So because of the denial, it has the Turkish government has been able to basically strong arm U.S. government. Like, for example, I cannot apply for government funding in my work, whereas if I was solely a Holocaust educator, I could. And because of Turkish denial, and every time, now the Senate and the House acknowledged the Armenian genocide last year, but the State Department did not. So it was still more ceremonial than actually changing policy. And so with the Holocaust, because Germany acknowledges it, and because of the process, which is ongoing with reparations, there is access to funds and public forums and museums that the Armenians don't have, and because of the ongoing denial. Turkey spends several $1 million a year in the U.S. alone to deny the Armenian genocide. And so it becomes a really difficult process. When anyone writes an article about the Armenian genocide, generally they try to sue the publication that it comes out of. There's so people are less apt to write about it. There's a lot of hurdles. Though I have to say that Kim Kardashian made a big difference. Kim Kardashian is Armenian, and every time she brings it up, it makes the top 10 list on Google. And very appreciative, maybe not as an American woman, but as a part of the Armenian community.
Yeah, she does talk about it a lot.
Yeah.
We do have not a question, but a comment from Jean Roseman, who said, excellent presentation. Most people don't know enough or even anything about it. Again, Nashville had a woman named Sadie Frank who went there after World War I and joined in the struggle.
Oh, really? Oh, that's really fascinating. I'm going to write down her name. I did not know that. Can you
always has pearls of wisdom to add. I'll put the two of you in touch, but we still don't have questions. I don't know if people are being shy. But was there anything else you wanted to add with Thanksgiving coming up? I think you kind of mentioned that.
Oh, right. Yeah, I have to tell you, for those of you still on, that I did ask Alex, like, are you sure this is an appropriate topic for the week of Thanksgiving? I mean, this has already been such a difficult year for all of us, and but with our I will say with our backgrounds, like we are used to talking about genocide in all sorts of occasions. It is a time to remember. This is I think this has been coined like Native American History Month, and there is I think there's still such a tremendous struggle for Native Americans today, and acknowledging that while Thanksgiving is a lovely warm holiday thought of today as family coming together, its roots are really more in colonialism and the beginnings of the genocide of the Native Americans. And I would just actually say too, like, this year, if you're looking at making a donation on Thanksgiving, it might be a nice idea to donate to an Indian health service, since Native Americans are being hit tremendously hard by COVID, primarily because of the lack of health services on reservations.
That's good to know. Okay, well, I hope everyone does have a safe Thanksgiving. Everyone out there watching, I know it's hard to talk to nobody on Zoom, so thank you so much, Sara.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Alex. And yeah, I hope everyone has I hope first and foremost, a safe Thanksgiving. And I hope we all can find something to be appreciative for in this difficult year.
Don't we all? Thank you again.
Thank
Have a
you.
great day.
Bye.
Take care.